my teaching and enhance their experience and help to become sort of this ecosystem of science communication that we do. And each of these classes develops these different projects, everything from electronic field trips to virtual reality to blogs to photo essays to the podcasts across the different classes that I have. And so it's really about project-based learning, and it's really this idea of trying to also teach our science communication students that it shouldn't just be making information look pretty. Like, you've heard of infographics, you've heard of blogs and websites where people are just like cramming information at you all day long. We live in a 24/7 information age world. And so I really am trying to actually train my students to dialogue with people, to communicate in a way that isn't just pushing information, but is actually like listening to them. What do you already know about this topic? How do you feel about it? Where did you get that information? And then entering conversations with people using scientific information. So this is a little bit of like the framework for how I teach and how we do what we do. These are the different classes involved at undergraduate and graduate levels and the different things that they're creating and all the outputs we have. And then we have graduate students who do research on all of it. So we research what are the impacts of the things we're creating and developing, what are youth learning from the electronic field trips, what are scientists learning when they have to participate in an interview and explain their science to, the public. So we have a little bit of that goes on around it as well. Just to give you an example, this is the electronic field trip class. The classes are a lot of fun. It's a lot to do, a lot to pull off. This was the electronic field trip class, and we did one called the Buzz About Bees, and we went over to the Honeybee Research and Extension Laboratory, and we did a live webcast to middle and high school students throughout the country and helped them learn about pollinator research and science. And you were in that one, right? You know that one. The next one here. Yeah. Okay, the next, yeah. So anyway, we have kind of a different theme and different groups we work with in that fall class. And the students learn the technology, but also have to meet scientists and work with them. So moving to the project that's relevant to this event and things that are happening. In spring 2021, I was still teaching classes online mostly. And this is where I'm like, oh great, what am I going to do with this class? The students are still, some of them home, some of them here. Teaching about podcasting online was a little bit tricky because it's a very hands-on thing that I usually need to be with them in person to show them how the different microphones work or how the software works. So this was the semester that we created these COVID podcasts. I had, I want to say I had about 10 students in the class. Each of them produced 2 podcasts where they interviewed scientists and graduate students about how COVID-19 was impacting their work and their lives. We created 17 podcasts total. They were ranging from 11 to 40 minutes, depending on who was participating. And then the people we interviewed were 8 scientists, 3 extension experts, and 6 graduate students in this series. And these are the places we stream it and all the things we do. Meanwhile, those 2 years, I had my own personal state of the science impact going on in my home and in my own life and my own teaching. And so it got very kind of surreal teaching this stuff and talking about it all day, but also living it at home every day. So these are my 3 children that year. And luckily, they each had a desk in their room already because we kind of have them do their homework there and things like that after school. But I had to rush out and buy Google Chromebooks very quickly when their school moved online that March 2020, and then get them set up in their rooms to learn how to use Canvas and all the things that their teachers were having to learn. And they had to sit through 6 Zoom calls back to back to back every day. It was intense. It was about 3 semesters of my children learning that way while their schools were online. Realizing that when one came out of their room, maybe they weren't listening to class anymore, and they were getting snacks, and they were playing, and they were like, and so I'm trying to do my job in the kitchen while I'm watching their 3 rooms to make sure they're paying attention and doing their schoolwork. So this was a little bit of just that impact on our lives at home while we were also trying to work with other people. And then I feel like sometimes I'm still, I don't know about you all, but I'm like, what year is it right now? I feel like you mentioned mental health, right? 2020 has just messed with my head forever. I feel like a lot of times I'm like, oh, it's 2023 now, and we're we're this far along from the pandemic, or things are happening. I just had COVID again this last June. I went back to my first face-to-face academic conference in Asheville, North Carolina, took a band of my graduate students to meet with my fellow professors in my discipline in person for the first time in years, came home with COVID. A new strand of it was out, and we all gave it to each other at the conference. So it's not over in my world. And also in 2020, I was very, very sick before March 2020 when we all were sent home. I was sick for several months, and I kept going to my doctor and going to my doctor, and they told me I had walking pneumonia. They kept doing scans of my lungs. I couldn't breathe very well. I was coughing everywhere. I was still coming into work like that, teaching, gave it to other people. I was an early spreader of COVID and had COVID for a good solid 6 months before they knew what it was and before they were able to give me a Z-Pack that finally killed it and got me under control, got my lungs under control. I'm still having some long-term effects from it, and I'm still getting COVID fairly easily when I'm around it now because of it. So I'm recovering quicker. I have all the vaccines and all the things. Make sure my children have all of them, but I feel like I'm still living it. I'm honestly kind of nervous to go back to the classroom this fall after everybody's been out and about all summer, and I'm a little nervous about what we're all going to bring back to each other. And I'm now taking a ton of vitamins and a ton of things and trying to keep my immunity up as strong as I can because of what I went through those couple of years. So just a little personal background. I'm sure we'll have plenty of stories to tell, but it was definitely having an impact on my teaching and my things I was thinking about doing with my students. So again, I think I just shared this, but this is what we called our podcast series from that class. We called it State of the Scientific Enterprise During COVID-19. So we're housed in the Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. So we interviewed a lot of our agriculture and natural resources, human sciences professors and extension people in this podcast series. And the students did it all from home. They interviewed them mostly on Zoom. And I had a little bit of seed funding from my college to buy microphones, and I shipped microphones to them at their homes so they could get good audio and taught them how to do that through Zoom. And then when we produced that podcast series and published them and sent them out through Streaming Science, I then had my graduate students do research on the podcast series itself. So it kind of got like layered and layered and layered. There's a research method called podcasting ethnography that kind of started up the last couple of years where you can listen to any podcast and do a research study on it. You're listening for themes of conversations and things people are saying over and over, and you follow these different steps to do this ethnography research about podcasting. So my graduate students the following year did a study on the podcast series we produced in that class. So I feel like this project went on multiple years more than I realized it was going to. So here are our research questions. When we listened to those podcasts back and we coded them and we did this qualitative study, how did COVID-19 impact teaching, research, and extension during that time? How did podcast participants navigate the pandemic in their personal lives? What were some of the barriers and opportunities they faced during the pandemic? And in what ways did the podcast participants showcase that they were adaptable to living and working during the pandemic? So those were our research questions that we went into and coded and listened to the interviews for. I'm curious from all of you, like when you hear these questions, do you think about yourself and have some answers? Like, here's how I coped. Here's how I survived that time. Your artwork out there tells me so. It tells me that you had a lot of coping mechanisms with nature, with family when you could, or with journaling, the whole journaling. I just looked up what you're doing, the day journaling process. I'm like, oh, this is arts-based research study. You could use that tool for lots of things. So I'm now fascinated by what you have done as well. So anyway, these are all questions I think we could even ask ourselves of what we faced and what we went through during the pandemic. So we went back and listened to the interviews. I'm going to play a couple pieces of them so you can just hear some of the scientists' voices and what they even said. But this first question, how did it change instructors? The theme we heard was COVID-19 changed how, instructors and students were engaging with one another. It slowed everything down. It slowed their pace of research. It moved some of their programs from in-person to online. A lot of faculty members would say things like, you know, a lot of times you're hoping your students are getting their work done on time and giving you everything the way you want it, and they're following directions and they're ready for their tests or whatever. But we heard a lot of, I just want to know that my students are okay. I just want to know that they're surviving. I'm trying to communicate with them and hear what they need from me, how I can support them, how I can help them. A lot of students said the same. I'm trying to reach out to my professors, trying to get the supports I need and things like that. But there was also a lot of mention of everybody felt pretty lonely and pretty isolated and pretty separate and apart. And they were pretty uncomfortable with how are we supposed to live and interact from here. I'll get through these things and I'll play the audio, maybe that'll be better. The second question was about like, what did they do during this time and how did it impact personal lives? A lot of what they talked about was they spent a lot of time at home with their families. Like, oh, like just like you saw my 3 kids in those pictures, a lot of scientists were like, oh, great, I still had to be a scientist and my lab got shut down and now I have to be with my people 24/7 and make sure my kids are doing what they should be doing. And there was just a lot of stress. But there was also a lot of positivity because some of them were like, I loved having the extra time with my family. I feel like I know my children more now because I had that time with them, or I know my spouse more, or I make more time with my parents during that time, whatever it might be. So there was a lot of positivity about, you know, that slower pace and spending more time with the people that matter to you. There was also a lot of mention about mental health emerging as a thing. We don't really talk to each other about that a whole lot, or like our students, right? I don't often say, or didn't before often say, like, how are you doing this week? How are you feeling? And that this changed everything, right? Like, how are we all doing? How are we coping and surviving? So a lot about mental health and work-life balance. And then, of course, the pandemic shut down a lot of stuff. A lot of people had major research projects going on where they had to shut down a lab. They lost some specimens, they lost some employees, or they just had a lot of loss during that time when it came to their research enterprise. And so everything really sort of slowed down or had to be rethought about how to do it, or had to start all over once we were able to come back. So there was a lot of discussion about that. And then, yeah, a lot of having to adapt to a new environment. And so some of them said, okay, if my research is shut down and I can't go to my lab, what can I do to still be like feeling like I'm getting something done and being productive? So a lot of them talked about shifting to using that season for more writing then, to get caught up on all the things they should be publishing or should be presenting. A lot of people in these interviews actually mentioned, man, it was so nice to be able to use Zoom and not to have to travel as much, which from a climate change perspective, we're very happy about that too, right? Like less planes in the air, less travel happening. And also, sometimes you go to a conference and people give presentations like this and you're like, why did I give up all that time with my family and friends just to come to this 1 day or 2 day thing and pay all this money for all these registration fees and stuff? So there was a positive that people were like happy some of it went online. It just kind of took the pressure off of the face-to-face daily life sort of things we have to do. I'm going to play some of their sound so you can hear some of their stories in their own voices and not mine, because I feel like I have spoken for some of them. This scientist is a pretty well-known entomologist, and she is a big deal in the bug world. So it was pretty amazing to hear someone who's sort of really high in her career and very making big impacts talk about. She's going to talk about self-care and taking care of herself and her mental health.
Is it Marjorie Hoy from Cedar Key? No.
There is Krista Court and there's Savannah Berry. I love the Cedar Key researchers.
Berry,
yes, Cedar Key. I go out there as much as I can because I love it. So yes, Savannah Berry is one of our people. Krista Court.
What helps me stay strong, I'm, like I said, still figuring it out, but during the pandemic, when, obviously very stressful time in general, with the kids home, with working a half time, not always fulfilling my responsibilities to my students. They're saying, I need stuff from you. And, trying to add that into working, part time. And then my grandmother passing away, I realized that I needed more more to keep me strong. And so during the pandemic, I took up daily meditation, which I think what we'll keep up with for a long time. That's been really helpful. But self-care, whatever form it takes, whether it's realizing you need a nap, realizing that some meditation every day, or any form of structure, honestly, any kind of structure is good for most people. Taking a hot bath at the end of the day, and those things, whatever it is for the individual, having projects that aren't stressful, but projects that are just purely fun. These kind of activities are, I think, essential when are probably for anyone, but I think especially when we're trying to do so much for others and we have demanding situations, we need to find ways to keep ourselves strong. I think.
I'm going to say another one. He's a graduate student, an international graduate student.
Hello, everyone. And
Let's see. 9:30. He's going to talk a little bit about what it was like to be here away from his home country and kind of feeling stuck a little bit.
As a researcher, you had to become pretty creative because you are in colleges and you go outside and you're trying to accomplish field work, but the university restrictions were put in place, and COVID pandemic restrictions, and you had to figure out how to be creative and productive with what you had.
Right, you have to figure out how to be creative. You have to work with it. Know that that's a reality, and you still have to maximize on your time.
Yeah, it's a really positive outlook that you have. So I'd also really like to talk to you about your personal experiences outside of your research. How has life changed for you as an international graduate student and father during the pandemic?
So life has changed for me as an international student during this pandemic. I think it's the first year I spent the first Christmas without my family. When you're here and you know that you can't go and they can't come because of the restriction, it is like it put a stress on you. And I feel like I spend more time and money and communication strategies how to still be a part of their life, right? To call wife, call children, and also to help them with their homework. I have to save, I have to buy computers for them to do homeschooling and try to make time to assist them with their homework immediately. This is new to them too, and they have their struggles.
I'm going to do one more. If you've maybe heard of him, Dr. Triplett, he was actually one of the scientists who was running all of our COVID tests when we were going to the stadium and things. When we would come back and we'd have to test to make sure we were healthy to go back to our offices and things. He is a disease researcher, and it was his job to sort of manage and oversee some of that process. And it's pretty interesting to hear him talk about what some of that was like. I found parts I thought were interesting. You guys can listen to them sometimes if there's more interesting stuff.
Well, like most folks, I laid low, especially the first half when we had the pandemic. For the most part, I laid very low. My employer, IFAS, has allowed me to do that, to stay safe. And I did so and worked from home from about last March all the way through January. And when I traveled only a few times by car only. I never flew. My family worked from home as well for the most part. So I think I was fortunate, one of the fortunate people in this country who has managed to maintain an income and managed to stay safe and have the income to allow me to have food delivered and all that sort of thing. So I was really kept in largely a bubble. But then I got my first dose of the vaccine December 30th and my second dose January 16th. So I started coming back to work January 25th. I've taken my first flight since that time. And I still wear a mask whenever I go outside this office. Or if I meet with someone in this office, I wear a mask. And I wear a mask everywhere else, just for good citizenship purposes. I think it helps support the view that we try to keep others safe.
And if you remember that time, there was a lot of like mixed messages from the university a little bit, and there were signs put up about masks are suggested here, or masks were required then suggested, then just kind of that signage and stuff faded away and the emails changed, and he had to kind of live through a lot of that, like when will we test, when won't we test, when are we requiring masks, and that seemed like a very stressful job to have to be in, but he's very calm and very kind about it all and understanding to people in their different positions and all the things, so pretty impressive. But that is what we did, and those were the themes we heard across these interviews. And I would say, like, overall, even though it was a very stressful time, you heard people lost some loved ones or how it impacted their lives or their work with their families. But overall, all of the people we interviewed and talked to were still trying to be very positive and trying to find the good side of everything and the humanity of everything. They did really stress, isolation wasn't necessarily their favorite part of it, though, and they had to find a lot of ways to take care of themselves and their mental health. But everybody was always searching for a solution to be adaptable. Like when I even mailed these microphones to my students, I was like, if they don't have the technology for the class that we would have usually provided to them, how are we going to solve this? So there was a lot of just really cool problem-solving things happening and people being very resilient. We think it doesn't get talked about or put together, but we're kind of suggesting like future research or ongoing research should look at positive psychology in crisis and how people are still sort of doing that, because there was, of course, a lot of things to be negative about, but it was pretty amazing to hear all the ways people would say, well, this was a really horrible thing, but it was okay because these things. So I think there's a lot of direction we could go with thinking about that when people are making crisis plans for the future and ways we can take this positive stuff to help each other. So this is what I brought today. I hope this was okay.
Well, thank you very much. In all my life as a knowledge producer who is an itinerant knowledge producer, moving from one continent to the other, one of the things that have fascinated me the most is how closed in the university system is. And there are no gates. People can come in and can go out, but they just don't. To find out what we do. There used to be a time in this city that if you saw an interesting course, all you needed to do was to write to the department head, and if there is space, you can just sit in. But I have spent 17 years here. I hardly get such requests. So for me, it was a very interesting thing when I approached Professor Loizzo that why don't we talk about things that were done? And I will tell you, there's a lot that has been done on this campus when it comes to COVID. A lot of research has been done and a lot of findings. And I'm sure you found this very interesting, just like I did. What people said, and the fact that we should start to think of psychology in crisis. One of the things I learned during this, I think it was last summer, was somebody said, we bother so much about poverty when you lack, the economics of lack. But what of the economics of affluence? Maybe when we start to study affluence, will bring out new things as well to understand the economics of lack. So I'm going to leave it at that. I have a little secret for you all, and I'm going to let it out of the bag. Isaac and Shannon have made shirts. They're not going to give it out today, but those of you who can make it here tomorrow will most likely just look back and see those lovely shirts they have made. It's a collector's item. They're not going to give it out tonight. Tomorrow is the final day when we have the community engagement. And I can share with all of you that during the community engagement, what we're looking for is, should we put a demand to the city of Gainesville asking that we need a place for memorial for COVID and those that have passed? We need to discuss it, we need to put it, we need to document it, and then pass it on, because the city manager is very aware of this project. And we would like to go and share with the city manager that this is what the people of Gainesville are thinking about. So I let out a secret in the bag, a cat from the bag, that if you show up tomorrow for the community engagement, you just might might win a shirt. And to those of you who like to frame things, you can frame it. You don't have to wear it. You can frame it as a memento to these 3 days. So without wasting too much time, why don't you just set up quickly and let's have the presentation.